Wherever you are, in whatever your health state is in, there is so much that you can do to turn things around. If I can come back, then so can you. There is so much that is under your control.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. Check out this incredible before and after photo of today's guest, Dr. Terry Wahls. 20 years ago, she was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called MS. She actually had a rare form called progressive MS. This extremely painful condition was debilitating her life. And in this photo, you can see her at her worst, wheelchair bound. But just a year later, she's riding her bike, smiling, out hanging out with her family, something she only dreamed that she would be able to do. What did she do to turn it all around and get to the root of her autoimmune condition? On today's podcast, we have Dr. Terry Wahls back. Her first episode right here was a smash hit, over 400,000 views. Today, she's going to walk us through a step-by-step approach, deep dive into her protocol. It's called the Wahls Protocol. It's a fascinating interview. Stay tuned. Dr. Terry Wahls, welcome back to the Dhru Purohit Podcast. I'm so honored to have you here. Your first interview that we did together was a huge hit, almost 400,000 views. I'm looking to build on that with today's conversation. I just covered your amazing transformation in our intro story, but I think that's a great place to start off with. Tell us, Dr. Wahls, how this transformation happened and where it all got started.
So let's go back 20 years. I'm out walking with my wife, Jackie. A half mile from home, my left leg grows weak. Dragging it, I hobble home. The neurologist says, Terry, this could be bad or really, really bad. At night, I think about my zingers, the jolts of electrical face pain that have been growing relentlessly worse for 20 years. And Dhru, I'm praying secretly for a fatal diagnosis. 3 weeks later, I hear multiple sclerosis. 3 years later, I hear tilt, recline, wheelchair. I take Novantrone infusions, then Tizabri infusions, but nothing helps. I am too weak to sit up at my desk. I go back to reading the basic science, and I begin experimenting on myself. I add supplements. I discover the paleo diet, but I continue the relentless decline. It is somewhat slower. Then I discover the Institute for Functional Medicine. I have a longer list of supplements. And I discover electrical stimulation of muscles and ask my physical therapist, can I try that? It's called e-stim. My test session hurts bad. But when it's over, I feel great. And I begin doing e-stim to as much pain as I can tolerate. My physicians say functions once lost will not come back because I have secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. I add meditation. I redesigned my paleo diet based on all the science that I have learned and I have studied for years. And 3 months later, I sit at my desk and my zingers are gone. 6 months later, I walk without a cane. And then for the first time in 6 years, with my son, Zach, jogging alongside on the left, my daughter, Zeb, on the right, I'm on my bike biking. And Dhru, this transforms how I think about disease and health, the way I practice medicine, and the focus of my research. 10 years later, I received the Linus Award for my groundbreaking clinical research. And just last month, we had the results published of our 4th clinical trial. It's just been so exciting and exhilarating to see what is possible.
That word possibility is the best word ever because that's what people who are listening and watching this interview are looking for. They're looking for a sense of hope. They're looking for a sense of possibility because having an autoimmune condition or even feeling like you're on your way in that direction can be so debilitating. It can impact your mindset. And when well-meaning individuals, researchers, organizations, societies tell you that there's nothing that can be done except for a Hail Mary pass for further research one day will come up with some maybe cure, it's very debilitating. It can be very discouraging. So that's what this interview is about. It's about possibility. And I appreciate you continuing to tell your story out there, because that's what you're giving individuals. And there's actually a documentary that's made about your life too. We're going to talk about that later on. For anybody that wants the next version after this interview, I highly recommend this documentary. It's so well put together. But Terry, let's start from the basics from there, right? Let's start from the basics and really build our way up. You mentioned your clinical research on the Wahls protocol. And, I have your book here with me, the Wahls protocol, the updated version, the revised and expanded. It's a fantastic resource. And in today's interview, we're going to be going through it step by step to talk about what people can do. But I want to start off the basics, help people understand, with what you've created in the Wahls protocol, at the time you started, this came from your own trial and error in your own life. And then years later, through building up your research, is it fair to say, the most researched protocol when it comes to intervening for folks that have autoimmune and specifically MS?
Well, certainly if you want to use diet as part of your treatment and wellness plan, the Wahls protocol is the most extensively studied diet of any groups out there. We've had 4 clinical trials. I have another clinical trial going on right now, the 5th one. And we'll be getting ready to start the 6th one later this fall. So we've had hundreds of people go through. And consistently, what we find is people can make very big changes to their diet. And consistently, we find people reporting improved energy, improved mental clarity, improved mood. And over time, if they're also adding in exercise and the other self-care routines, then they will begin to see improvements in motor function as well. And Dhru, I want to be very clear, this is more than MS. When I was in the VA, we had and I was first using these principles in the traumatic brain injury clinic, where there is no treatment for traumatic brain injuries other than just wait, watch, and see what happens. And I came in and said, wait, there's a lot we can do. Let's address all the modifiable lifestyle factors. And people who I saw, you could tell that they were less irritable, they had less brain fog, they could get along better with their coworkers, their family, and they're coming back and they're improving. That led ultimately to the VA, the local VA, asking me to pull me out of primary care and create the therapeutic lifestyle clinic, where we use those principles in that clinic. And I went to the VA, to the pain clinic, to medicine clinics, and even to mental health, and said, give me your most difficult cases, the people you cannot help, but you let them know, I'm not giving them drugs. We're going to be using diet and lifestyle, things that are under their control. You will continue to manage their drugs, but I'll inspire them and we'll help them make these changes. So the most common problems or symptoms were pain, fatigue, low mood, irritability, with a wide variety of root causes, diabetes, autoimmune problems, anxiety, depression, degenerative problems, cognitive decline, and of course a wide variety of autoimmune problems. But very consistently, as we help people implement basically the Wahls diet and our self-care routines, within the first month, people would come back and say, for the first time, I'm beginning to feel better. It's not that they were fully recovered, but they could tell their energy was a little bit better. Their mental clarity was a little bit better. Their quality of life was better. And eventually, I was giving reports to the chief of medicine, the chief of the pain clinic, every 3 months because we're having such success. Then I started giving my reports to the chief of staff and the hospital administrators, again, because I was having so much success.
No, that's a great point, and an important point for anybody watching is that you may have come in because autoimmune was in the title, or you saw Terry's story about MS, But really, this is a protocol that can help on a broad spectrum of things. And that really goes to this larger idea that you open up your book with, which is that we have to understand that there's a little bit of a difference in terms of how conventional medicine sees disease and functional medicine, which you're a big proponent of and practice and have integrated into your Wahls protocol, and now it's become its own thing. There's a difference in the way that they look at health and disease. Can you talk about that basic core difference and then go a little bit more deeper into specifically autoimmune, since we're talking about that here?
So in the conventional world, we spend a huge amount of dollars and resources understanding pathogenesis. What is the specific molecular pathways that are broken, leading to disease? And so we might have drugs to treat antibiotics, which are really very effective. And we have drugs to control symptoms for a wide variety of disease states. We've never spent much money understanding what are the molecular processes with healing and repair. In my own recovery, I would say the big turnaround was when I decided, you know what? I should just focus on what are the things that I can do that the research says are helpful for improving health. So when I focused less on disease, I was still taking conventional drugs at that time, like, okay. So I quit searching for better treatments for disease, and I started searching for better treatments for health. That's when I got into the meditation. That's when I'm reading all I can about diet, nutrition. At first I'm focused in on supplements. And I've discovered functional medicine that's talking about mitochondria, which I really loved, and they're talking about the root causes of why we develop problems with our microbiome, why we develop problems with our immune cells, why we have problems with toxic overload, hormonal imbalance. That was very appealing. But the magic for me, Dhru, was when I thought about my diet and my long list of supplements. Because I'd been on a paleo diet by that point 5 years. And basically the autoimmune protocol, really focused on what to remove. Not so focused on what to be sure I was eating. The magic happened, Dhru, when I said, all these supplements I'm taking to support my mitochondria, support my detox pathways, and support NF-kappa B and better epigenetic changes. Where are those compounds in the food supply? And how could I get those compounds still following the paleo principles? So now, and that, by the way, was several more months of research trying to figure out where they were. My dietitian friends couldn't help me out, and I went to our health science library. I was doing some searching there. The Linus polling, micronutrient center was very helpful. So it was in December of 2007 that I had these list of these foodstuffs that I wanted to be emphasizing. And it was December 26th that I began this very intentional of what I need to eat to get all these nutrients that I identified as key. And then it was the month of January that I was like, my fatigue is less. My mental clarity is less. And my trigeminal neuralgia is much less of a problem. And so, 4 weeks into this, it was very clear, like, wow, something is happening. And then, 3 months later, I'm walking without a cane down the hallway. My colleagues are like, Dr. Wahls, what happened? You're walking.
Because you were, as we showed in the beginning with the before and after photo, at your lowest, you were in a wheelchair.
Well, and it's even worse than being in a wheelchair. I was so weak, I could not sit up in a regular chair like this. I had a zero gravity chair in my office and here at home, so I could recline back with my knees higher than my nose. And my trigeminal neuralgia was, progressively more severe, much more difficult to turn off. It had gotten to the point, so I was at a maximum dose of gabapentin. When it turned on, I'd go in to the pain clinic and get injections back over the occipital nerve, and that wasn't enough. Then, so the last round that I had, it had turned on. I was getting my injections. They'd given me Solumedrol. I took 3 doses of Solumedrol, 1 gram, to get it turned off. Then the next time it came, it took 5 doses of Solumedrol. And so, at that point, and Dhru, the trajectory of my illness was very clear. I was on track to become bedridden, probably demented, or possibly, and quite possibly have that trigeminal neuralgia turned permanently on. And that was, while it's on, a breeze on your face triggers the jolt of pain, speaking triggers it, swallowing triggers it. I no longer want to swallow, and so I'm drooling because swallowing triggers the pain, and it's profoundly difficult to speak because speaking triggers pain.
I want to add some context and some layers that are here because, you talked about how bad things were for you. And, if we look at the stats, things are getting bad for a lot of people, or they're heading in that direction. Autoimmune conditions are on the rise. So help us understand, you gave the layer and the difference between functional medicine and, sort of conventional medicine. Give us the contrast and understanding of why does autoimmune disease happen? What happens? If you go to most people, because they hear you teasing out diet, if you go to most people, you go to Times Square, you go here in California where I live, you go to Hollywood, you pick up a few people off the street that are there and you're like, hey, do you live a healthy lifestyle? Most people, obviously they have their own definition of what it is. They're going to say, I think I live a healthy lifestyle. So tell us, what is going on in modern society that autoimmune conditions are on the rise in the way that they are?
And I want to point out, I had a great healthy lifestyle, regular exercise, and I was a vegetarian, low-fat diet, very low fat. So people would have said this was a phenomenally healthy lifestyle. But for me, it clearly was not sufficient. The body, when we are encountering insults, and that can be infection, toxins, it can be hormonal imbalance, trauma. When we have these insults, we can either create oxidative stress, we can create inflammation, and when we resolve the infection or the trauma, then we go back and heal, restore the damaged tissues, and we're healthy. When we have too many insults that we cannot fully recover, that is when chronic disease develops. So for most people with an autoimmune problem, we've had probably decades, at least several years, but for many decades of the autoimmune processes that are slowly building, where damage is happening at the cellular level. People will have fatigue, they have pain, they may have chronic migraines, chronic headaches. Women may have severe menstrual cramps, pain, endometriosis, infertility. We may discover that we have low levels of anti-nuclear antibodies. That's been going on for years. And all of those things, in fact, had been happening to me before I finally started. And then, I started having the trigeminal neuralgia during medical school. I had infertility. and had a severe endometriosis, had positive ANA, but not high enough to make a diagnosis of lupus or RA. And then I developed weakness in my left leg, had my MRI, my spinal tap, and the MS diagnosis. But the symptoms began probably as an adolescent, and the triggers began much, much earlier. So, very early in my life, my sister died when I was 9. So that's, a big adverse childhood event.
That's a big trauma in somebody's life.
Huge trauma for my family. Earlier than that, when I was 3, I had recurrent tonsillitis and a tonsillectomy. So there's a big dysbiosis problem. The adverse childhood event, and probably I had developed a leaky gut, developed food sensitivity to gluten. And, during adolescence, I began having troubles with migraines and mild asthma. And, really severe menstrual cramps. And I was probably developing endometriosis at that point. So my autoimmune processes, I bet, began with the early antibiotics, that's disrupted the microbiome, accelerated by the adverse childhood events, and then had this long prodrome. And for all of you who may be in that prodrome phase, if you understand the diet and the lifestyle, it's very, very possible that we can stop the autoimmune processes entirely, reverse everything entirely, and get all of the labs back to not detectable, and regress many of the disease processes. And for your audience members who have an autoimmune disease, who may have significant disability, there's every reason to have hope for the possibilities. Because, I had immense disability. I had immense levels of pain. I was too weak to sit up. But I was able to have dramatic change in a year's time, but with intense work with my physical therapist, intense, thoughtful nutrition that focused now on what to eat as opposed to just what to remove, and all of the other very thoughtful, modifiable lifestyle factors that I zeroed in on. Because Dhru, I did all of that not to recover, because I knew it, my physicians were very clear: you cannot recover. You have progressive MS. I was doing all that I could to slow my decline. I did not think that I would be sitting up or walking or jogging or biking.
Yeah, at that time, the greatest dream was if I could at least slow the decline, maybe I could show up better for not only yourself, but your family that you love so dearly. And you were able to, of course, as we know, because the punchline was shared in the beginning, you were able to surpass that. And now in full hero's journey, you're taking what you've learned back to folks, saying that, great, if you have an autoimmune disease, there's hope, and I'm going to give that to you, and I'm going to show you what's there. I'm going to show you the research, and I'm going to give you the protocol. But even for the bigger group that's in that sort of what we call pre-Alzheimer's phase, the proto phase that you mentioned earlier, it's so important to understand. The contrast, again, to bring it back to the last question, is that how does conventional and functional medicine look at things differently? Well, functional medicine, and especially through the lens of the Wahls protocol, understands that it's not one thing that caused autoimmune to happen in a particular person. There could be a primary area, but it's not one cause for everybody. Everybody's different. So there's not going to be one solution. Yet right now, still pervasively in medicine, there's the vision that there's looking for the silver bullet that can fix an autoimmune condition specifically, even though there's a little bit more open-mindedness. People are starting to open their eyes a little bit, but they're still looking for the silver bullet to fix it. And there's no silver bullets. We have to look at the total aspect of it all. So I want to pick up on something that you shared earlier, because I think that distinction is huge. Can you name the most common, from what you've seen based on your journey? You gave us a little bit of a summary, but just so that we have it here, what are the most common pillars, or rather pathways, to introduce, an autoimmune type of response in the body? So one of them you mentioned earlier was when our gut gets, pretty messed up. Could be from antibiotics, diets, not having in the right foods. And sometimes it's referred to as like, molecular mimicry. Would you say that that's one of the pathways?
That's a very, very common pathway, is that you're growing the wrong bacteria and yeast in your bowels. And so that's going to make toxic metabolites that get into your bloodstream that can rev up your inflammation. Plus, if you get a leaky gut, then these partially digested food proteins get into your bloodstream, and that can also rev up your inflammation and cause sensitivity to more food proteins. So you develop more intolerances. In my case, gluten, dairy, and eggs, severe reactions to those. And then you can have these foods and the bacteria and the yeast interact with your immune cells directly. So now my immune cells are imbalanced and may be more reactive, more aggressive, more pro-inflammatory. That is a huge, huge driver. But there are other drivers too, Dhru. Vitamin D. We spend most of our time inside. We work inside, we do our recreation inside, and often when we go outside, we're covered up in clothes. And even if we take our clothes off, because we're going to go sunbathe or do some sports, we are likely to put on sunscreen to protect ourselves against the harmful UV radiation, because we don't want to have damage to our skin, without realizing that by covering up our skin or by using sunscreen, that also prevents our skin from being able to make enough vitamin D. So there is an epidemic of low vitamin D levels. If your vitamin D level is low, there is a much higher rate of autoimmune disease processes, and actually a wide variety of other chronic health problems as well. Another factor has to do with the synthetic chemicals that I may have in my body. That, for example, if I have lead or mercury, or a lot of plastics in my blood, I am more likely to have problems with an autoimmune process.
And just to intervene, just to connect the story together, anybody who's watched our first interview, which you haven't, definitely watch that after this. You talked about growing up on a farm and being exposed to a lot of different pesticides as a child. And pesticides can be one of those toxic components that now cause all sorts of havoc in the body, in addition to mercury that people could get from consuming, too much large fish quantity, in the diet. But primarily it looks like most people, if they're not occupationally getting it from being in sort of a hazardous work environment, looks like dental amalgam fillings that might have some mercury could be one pathway. We've done some episodes on that. So I just wanted to connect it back to your story, because here you are, a young woman who had trauma in her life from losing her sister, growing up in an environment where you're exposed to, pesticides that are there, missing out. I don't know. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Let's talk about air quality.
Yes, please.
Quality. So in Iowa, atrazine is in the groundwater. So atrazine, again, is a common herbicide that's been since banned. We also have what's going on in the air. When I was very young, both of my parents were smokers. And think about now, what is the air quality in your community? what is the air quality now with all of these wildfires that are going across many parts of the world because of changes in the climate, that we have these large fires that increase particulate air pollution. These compounds increase autoantibodies and will accelerate a autoimmune disease process.
Which basically means, just so everybody's following along, and if you have a better analogy, please jump in. You're the expert. I'm just asking questions. But it basically means that, we've talked a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic of, people want to increase their immune system, boost their immune system. Well, really, you want an immune system that's at the right level, not overreactive and underreactive. And if we're talking about autoimmune, which we are here, and let's say you have a lot of toxins, then you have some stealth viral infections, which also now they're understanding that COVID virus can live stealth inside the body and show up and rear its head when somebody's vulnerable. But all these things are insults and they ramp up the immune system. So your immune system becomes overreactive, and then that can trigger over years an autoimmune, diagnosis.
Correct. Let's talk about sleep.
Please.
I was a very ambitious, hardworking young person. And also my entire life, I've been easily activated so that it'd be hard to fall asleep, wake up early, hard to fall back to sleep. And I thought, well, that's fine. There's a lot I want to do, books to read, papers to write. And so I thought it was fine to get by with 4 hours of sleep a night. Well, it is not fine to have only 4 hours of sleep a night. Inadequate sleep is a common problem for people with autoimmunity. In people in that prodrome state. Actually, for many people here in America and the Western world, we're not sleeping enough, and that increases our vulnerability.
Absolutely. And just to connect those dots, prodrome, right? Prodrome is that area that you're talking about. You may not have a diagnosis, but it's the buildup. What's going on subclinically where your markers still may be off. You don't feel good. You're noticing things that don't even necessarily look like they could become autoimmune until you hear interviews like this, but you are just not feeling good and you're not in an optimal state and you feel lethargic. You feel maybe tired. You feel like you can't focus. If you're a woman, your menstrual cycle is maybe not, in the best place. You have really severe PMS symptoms. If you are a man, you could even be suffering from erectile dysfunction. So what are the things that are happening that are an indication that you're on your way to, unfortunately, something tragic happening if we don't get a chance to intervene?
If, as you reflect on your life, are your symptoms gradually getting worse? Are you having more fatigue? Do you need higher and higher doses of caffeine to get through the day? Are you exhausted? Are you more irritable, more anxious, more depressed? And if you're honest with yourself, looking back over time, are you feeling like, I'm not as healthy and vigorous as I was 2 years ago or 3 years ago? That's certainly very troublesome. And so if you were seeing me as a patient, I would certainly be asking about your health events, your life events, taking you through the functional medicine matrix, trying to identify what are your root causes and what can we do to focus on getting your biological systems in better alignment. And we would try and help you make realistic goals and work step by step at improving your diet, at addressing sleep if that's an issue, at addressing stress if that's an issue, at addressing movement. But we have to make these changes step by step at a pace where you could actually be successful.
I love that word step by step. And I have a feeling that this podcast is probably going to be called, somewhere in the title, it's going to be step by step, because it's so important to present the possibility. Your story starts the conversation. And that's what, you do a great job about, because now people are seeing that, whoa, something that I didn't think was possible is now possible. And then gradually, as we start to cover these different pathways or factors, it can seem daunting. And really what you've done with the Wahls protocol is you've made it step by step. So let's start there. Somebody comes to you and they say, Terry, I'm so inspired by your story. I want to get started down this pathway. What's the first thing to be thinking about, and how has that evolved your answer over the years as you've worked with more and more patients?
Well, interestingly enough, I used to be very, very emphatic that we have to start with your diet, get your diet cleaned up first. And then over time, particularly as I was working with the vets, I came to realize that we have to get the inspiration and the mental game first so that they're willing to do the work. Because whether we start on the diet or perhaps stress or exercise, whenever you change your behavior, add a new desirable behavior or extinguish a undesirable behavior, it takes effort, it takes work. I'm going to be a little uncomfortable. It's going to take some effort. And helping people identify why they want to go on this journey. What is it that I care so much about that I'm willing to do this work? And then we have a conversation like, when it gets hard, what will be helpful to keep you going? So that's actually step number one. And it was my vets who taught me that. Then step number two is, okay, so I can tell you what I think is the best diet for you. And we talk about stress and movement. And while I would like you to start with diet, I need to know, is that where you want to start? Because we have to start where you want to start and where you are willing to do the work. I used to be very emphatic and say, you got to start on the diet. And I've come to realize for some people, they need to start with perhaps a meditative practice instead, or they may need to start with an exercise program because they can be successful there and they aren't ready to be successful with the diet. When I was emphatic that people had to start where I thought they needed to start, I was not nearly as successful as when I let my patient guide where they wanted to focus first.
That's a great reminder for everybody who's listening, because we often have a idea in our head of how we want things to go. And in reality, even though we think, okay, I would love to start off with diet because I can, maybe even along the process, I can lose a little bit of weight or I can feel a little bit better. But sometimes you have something that can give you more momentum that you can see a quick win on. Or sometimes you have a blockage that is so strong, like a traumatic event that happened in your life. And there's not the strength in that moment until something else is addressed or at least given perspective to then be able to start. So I think it's just a really great reminder, because so many people do come in through the pathway of diet because it's naturally something that we interact with 3 times a day. What do you think are some of the nuanced thoughts that you really want to introduce to people, especially coming from the place where you were, from the way that a lot of external people would say, you were doing all the health things. You were vegetarian. You were eating a low-fat diet back then. Really, that's what a lot of what people were focused on.
And then I switched to the paleo diet.
Right.
And I was, so no grain, no dairy. I'd reintroduced meat. That was a big deal. But I still declined for the next 5 years, although it was more slowly than when I was a vegetarian. So the paleo diet wasn't enough. For me, I think I was so ill. I mean, and clearly I was. I was profoundly ill. And it was when I focused on what to eat. So, Dhru, I will tell people which diet I think is the most therapeutic for them. But then I'll follow up with, so that's a big change from what you're eating now. Whatever we're going to have you do, I want to be sure you can be 100% successful, that you can actually do this ideally for the next 3 months. And then we have a conversation. Do they think they can do it? And if they can't, then we negotiate what it is they think they could do at 100% and for what time period so that they can be successful with the intervention that they're willing to do. Yeah, and for some folks, they're like, your Wahls level 1, it just sounds too hard. And so we might do a Mediterranean diet first. Or they might say, even that's too hard. And so then we talk about, okay, how far could you go with taking sugar out of your diet? So there's sort of a pre-Wahls work that people may do. But if they can do at least the Wahls level 1, which is gluten-free, dairy-free, and preferably egg-free, at least for a couple of weeks, and ramping up the vegetables so that they can begin to feel like, okay, something's happening. And that was the approach I take with my vets. If they're going to be in our group classes with me, they'd have to commit to 100% for 100 days, no gluten and no dairy, and the goal of 9 cups of vegetables a day. And it was very funny. My vets would say, like, so that 9 cups, is that a month? So no. That's a day. Yeah. So we'd have these conversations like, oh my God. So for the vets, and if they were meat eaters, the basic recipe I would give them, say, okay, take a couple of pieces of bacon, fry them in the skillet to the desired level of doneness, take the bacon out, put your vegetables in, stir it around for 2 minutes, and serve. You chop up your bacon and have your vegetables. And if the vegetables are bitter, add a tablespoon of lemon juice. And if they're still bitter, double the bacon and try again. And the vets would, and we would make bacon and greens for them. I would have them eat the kale raw, so they understood, like, yep, that's really quite bitter. We'd cook the bacon and greens together, serve that, and they'd go like, oh my God, that is delicious. So that made it possible for them to realize vegetables could in fact be delicious. You see, when we went low fat, by taking away the fat, these strong flavored vegetables had become bitter.
Yeah, you're talking about, just to interject, you're talking about the society. When the society went through the low fat craze, please continue. I just wanted to make sure people knew that you weren't talking about your protocol. You were talking about society, particularly in America.
When society went low fat in the 1960s, it took a generation of children and families away from vegetables because the vegetables were so bitter. Then you could sort of compensate with a lot of sugar to try and make it more tolerable. And unfortunately, the consequence was the vegetable consumption went way down, sugar consumption went way up, obesity rates went way up, mental health problems went way up, autoimmune issues went way up. There's actually a very interesting paper that recently was reading about the differences between vegetables with a strong flavor in terms of a higher polyphenol content and a more favorable impact on epigenetic markers with lower inflammation markers. So there's a huge benefit for us for having these strongly flavored vegetables in foods.
What I love about the point you just shared is that it's not just about what not to eat, although that's part of the conversation. You just listed 3 things there that are very important specifically for people that are dealing with autoimmune, but even if people who are dealing with, some symptoms that would be on their way to autoimmune if they don't have a diagnosis. And you talked about gluten, dairy, and eggs, but you also said it's not just about what we remove, it's about what we add in. And from our last interview, and you hinted at it a little bit, I remember really 2 to 3 foods that are so underrated and missing in our society, and yet they were a game changer for you. One you already mentioned, which was bitters. The next one you talked about, which was the quantity of fiber, which parallels into bitters, right? So that 9 cups of vegetables a day, not a month, a day. And then the other one that we didn't chat about was organ meat. Now we'll get to organ meat in a second because you were a big proponent of that. And especially I felt very motivated myself. Was a lifelong vegetarian all the way up until the age of 26, 27 years old, even being vegan for many years, thinking that I was doing the right thing for me. And at some point in time, what was working great stopped working. Even though I didn't have autoimmune, even though I didn't have any things like that, I had severe gastrointestinal issues and I started looking elsewhere. And then that's when I found functional medicine. So we'll get to organ meat in a second, but I want to tease out the 9 cups of vegetables, which is a core central part of your protocol. Help us understand, why is our grandmother's advice of eating your veggies, but with fat, so crucial to the part of recovery for your journey and many other people?
Well, it was interesting when I started really focused on what I need to be eating. And I ramped up my greens in such a huge way. And I just had this immense craving for greens. And I just add in, there's onions, cabbage, mushroom family, and then things that are deeply colored. And as I taught my vets how to do this, it's mostly a male practice. I didn't want them hungry. So I said, 6 to 12 ounces of meat, and then 9 cups of vegetables, and then go back to eating your meat. So the goal was to not have people be hungry. If someone's very petite, 4'11", she's not going to be able to eat 9 cups. So my advice to her is, get in your 2 palm-sized servings of meat, and then greens, the sulfur category, and the colored category proportionally. That way, they're getting some of the polyphenols, they're getting all those carotenoids.
And could I interject for a second? A lot of people have heard this word polyphenols, and they may not be understanding like what's happening as a mechanism in the body. Why are these colors that are part of vegetables and fruits, and the ones that you recommend, especially for people in the Wahls protocol, like the ones that are sort of lower in lectins and other things, maybe less likely to cause gut irritation? Why is it, like, what's actually happening in the body and specifically in the gut that these polyphenols are actually doing?
Well, we are getting closer to understanding this through metabolomics. What's happening is we eat this food. The trillions of bacteria in our bowels also eat the food that we've eaten, and then they metabolize it, and they metabolize each other's metabolites. These compounds get into our bloodstream, and we're now beginning to measure the metabolome, that is the further metabolites, tens of thousands of metabolites that are in the stool, the tears, the blood, the urine, vaginal secretions. And we're looking at some of the pathways are pathways that you and I can run because they're part of human physiology. But there are also a lot of compounds that you and I can't run the chemical reactions. It is the bacteria in our bowels that are running these chemical reactions on the food that we eat. And these compounds get into our bloodstream. And we're now beginning to understand how these bacterial metabolites get into our bloodstream and what the relationship is between those metabolites and the risk of heart disease, the risk of cancer, the risk of infection, the risk of mental health, that's not good mental health, and the risk of autoimmunity. There'll be further and further research. These polyphenols, these carotenoids, are substrates for all of these molecular reactions that will happen with our bacteria. We are an ecosystem. And, our ancestral mothers and our fathers, but this is really a maternal line, there would be random mutations that occur because that occurs in life. And if the mutation for a step was no longer effective, but our bacteria that are in our gut could still do that step. That was at that point, that molecular pathway, the genetic information for that step got exported from our ancestral mother to her ancestral microbiome. And that's how you and I have about 25,000 genes, but we have about 5 million genes from all of the microbes in our gut. And it's a rich diet full of diverse plants without a lot of sugar, without a lot of processed food, that feeds the microbiome to get all of those metabolites that we need for optimal health. That's what those polyphenols are doing for us. That's what all those carotenoids are doing for us. And that's why the foods that are so helpful are herbs, the strong flavored fruits and vegetables, because the things that are sweet and starchy have been cultivated and bred to be sweet and starchy. And those useful compounds that have been feeding our microbiome that are so helpful for how we run the chemistry of life are present in diminishing amounts in these vegetables and fruits that have been bred for sweetness and for weight and size.
Yeah, which is really actually interesting. I remember hearing a report on NPR about the challenge that modern banana farmers are facing in Hawaii, because the banana, it has been so hybridized and bred to be sweeter and sweeter. Mother Nature always likes an equilibrium. And one of the challenges with modern banana plants, because of how they've been bred, is that they're so susceptible to viruses, because a lot of the minerals that were normally part of them that help them ward off bacteria and viruses are no longer there. And instead they have more sugar content. So it's very difficult to keep these trees alive in the first place because they're so sensitive to pathogens and viruses. And in a similar way, we're seeing this with ourselves as human beings. If we become too sweet on the inside, our metabolic health isn't good. Our blood sugar is too high. We don't have all the key nutrients that are there to protect ourselves. And more importantly, even our bacteria. We start to become vulnerable to opportunistic things, even like COVID-19.
And the USDA has monitored the vitamin and mineral content of beef, chicken, apples, and a couple more tomatoes. Spinach maybe. There's another vegetables in there. And what they have found over the last 75 years is the mineral content has decreased in the plants and the meat. The vitamin content has likewise decreased in the plants and the meat. The lifespan of a dairy cow is much, much shorter than it was when I was a kid milking cows, because of the changes to farming practice.
It's all around. The quantity of what we're making is increasing. The size of what we're making is often increasing, including the animals, unfortunately, through our factory farming practices, but the quality is missing out. On the topic of quality, I promised we'd come back to it, and that's organ meat. And I want to help folks understand, when I was even a raw foodist, right? I was a raw foodist for a period of time, and I was a very passionate vegan. Primarily from animal rights perspective. I grew up vegetarian, so it wasn't it's a natural extension. When people would bring up, the ancestral origins of organ meat, there was less research around it as there is now. There was less awareness of it. It was like, why would you want to eat an organ of an animal, like especially something like a kidney or liver? That's where all the toxins go through in that animal, the same way that it would go through in a human being. That would be the thing that you'd want to stay away from. What do we understand now about organ meats and why they can be so essential for people to heal?
When I give my talk to TIFM, I have this great chart that lists the vitamin and the mineral content of kale, beef steak, heart, and liver. And what you see is the concentration. So the kale wins vitamin C hands down. Every other nutrient, liver wins hands down. So they have much. It has more vitamin A. It has more of all of the B vitamins. It has more of all of the minerals, which are more easily absorbed. It is your best source for vitamin B12. It is your best source for coenzyme Q. Our ancestors prized liver as a superfood. They prized heart as a superfood. And I mean, liver is absolutely a superfood. I, however, want to remind people the goal is 6 to 8 ounces of liver per week. And then I encourage 6 to 8 ounces of other things like oysters, mussels, clams, sardines, particularly if you can get them with the bones. Tongue, incredibly delicious. Liver, kidneys, also really quite delicious. Don't overdo the liver. If you overdo vitamin A from liver, that can, and it takes time. This is a chronic fibrosis of the lungs and of the liver can result. So 6 to 8 ounces is ideal. Some of the carnivores folks are into a pound plus of liver each week. That I'm very concerned that those folks will develop a slow fibrosis of their lungs and of the liver. Which will have to be treated with transplant.
And also in the animal kingdom, you have, for many animals, well documented is that when a lion finally gets that gazelle, or other animals that are out there, even wolves, when the pack in their order of sort of hierarchy goes in, you see that the digestive organs and the those organs even are the most precious for the animal. Something instinctually is in them to go after those things first, and then come back down to the muscle meats.
Our ancestors, if there was plenty of meat, would leave the muscle meat behind. They would save the organs, but leave muscle meat behind. And so the question is, if I'm worried about toxins, you should be worried about the fat. The toxins are stored in the fat. So be worried about the fatty cuts of meat. Be worried about having a bacon. That's far a bigger problem than the liver or the kidneys. The toxins are stored in the fat.
Oh, that's a great insight and a reminder. With toxins being lipophilic, of course, that makes sense that they're going to be in the fat tissues that are there. And for folks that are in this place where they're like, okay, not just for people who are quote unquote sick or suffering with an autoimmune condition, but even for people that are looking for optimal health, there's a strong reason for organ meats and including them in your diet. Really, what we're talking about here is that if you can, because a little goes a long way, we're talking about staying away from factory farm meats and really focusing on, grass-fed meats or pasture-raised meats, because if you are what you eat, these animals that are grown in factory farmed places are eating Skittles and corn and crushed candy and, all sorts of stuff that's there. And they're being mistreated, which is, super not a great situation. So really that distinction. What do you think of, oh, sorry, please jump in.
In Iowa and much of the Midwest, there's a big deer problem. So many communities have controlled hunts and have lockers with venison, and will give venison away free to anyone who comes down looking for venison. So one of the strategies that we would talk about with our vets, because I teach them how to do the Wahls protocol, living on food stamps. And so if people say I can't afford doing the Wahls protocol, I'm like, well, I was able to teach our vets how to do this living on food stamps. And so using wild game, using venison was certainly part of that. And we would teach people how to make some vegetarian meals using a pressure cooker, rice and beans, to make things more affordable.
And for those people that are still gearing up, I come from a community of, a lot of vegetarians and vegans, friends and family, other things like that. And they're now starting to, not everybody, some people for religious reasons. And again, you can follow the protocol, the Wahls protocol, if you're vegetarian, right? You got to make a lot of, you got to be very diligent. You got to make up for things where, things are missing out. And you do talk about that and have resources that are there. So we're not here to convince anybody who morally feels that they, want to be vegetarian or vegan. Everybody can do this, right? But for the folks that are open-minded and are willing to sort of head in that direction, sometimes they say, okay, I'm not yet at the place where I'm transitioning to maybe eat it. What are the, are there things that are halfway? Like, how do you feel about organ supplements that people are taking?
So a couple of things. It took me a long time to go from, being a vegetarian to eating meat. So I had to gradually ease into this. So soups, stews, bone broth, to get my digestive system ready to tolerate meat. For those who are ready to begin organ meat capsules can be very helpful. Learning how to prepare organ meat can be really very helpful. I have some great recipes in my book. Baked chicken liver is incredibly delicious. It's one of my family's favorite meals. Lamb liver is very mild. The key is to not overcook it, leave it medium rare. But capsules can be very helpful. And then another helpful strategy is there are more companies, I believe U.S. Wellness Meats being one of them, that will make an ancestral blend. So they grind up heart, liver, and the ground to make a blend and spice it like a sausage, and that can be really quite lovely. When we were growing up, there was a meat that was Braunschweiger, that was a lovely sandwich spread, and I had no idea that basically is a liver spread. People may have heard of liverwurst, again, sort of a ground liver and ground meat that was quite delicious.
I ultimately, in my own journey, the place that I eventually want to get to, because I really believe in this, I think that if you are, and I'm not saying that other people should believe this, but this is something that I personally believe, and I need to work myself up to it and really have my actions meet my sort of beliefs, is that I love the idea. And I think the concept of, if you're willing to eat it, you have to also be willing to kill it. A little bit of that Native American philosophy. And I want to get to a place where the only meats that I'm consuming on a regular basis are ones that I've participated in, and I understand what it means to take an animal's life and to have that and the sacrifice that went into it. Very similar to, a lot of what you see in the Native American history. I think that's a beautiful way to look at things, and also understand that, you are taking a life, because I still think about that thing. I still think about that. That's part of, nature. That's part of all aspects of it. And it's just to participate in the cycle of nature.
And it also makes it more clear the responsibility to consume the whole animal.
Yes, absolutely. On the other pathway of gearing up, the one question I didn't get a chance to ask you about the fiber side is that some people that are watching this interview, they are struggling with GI issues, especially if they are on the autoimmune spectrum, and they're thinking, man, I can barely have any fiber without my stomach having abdominal cramping, pain, bloating, or severe, discomfort.
Yeah.
How do I gear up and build up to a level where I'm having those 9 cups of fruits and vegetables every day?
Well, keep in mind, I wrote the book for the public. And while I can create a protocol that is uniformly fatal for everyone, those are called poisons. When we're creating something that's to be uniformly healing, we have to pay attention to the individual. What is their symptom? What are their comorbid problems? And start with the general recommendation and make adjustments depending on that person's circumstances. So I like to ask people about their bowel movements and their belly complaints. And the questions I ask are you pooping rocks, logs, snakes, pudding, or tea. If you've got pudding or tea, you have too much inflammation, and we need to decrease the amount of fiber in your diet. And we're going to be doing soups and stews, more bone broths, probably very gradually increasing the vegetables. And we can't do that until we get your bowel movements back to snakes and logs. And if the snakes are getting into your pants, we still have to back down the fiber until you have control of your bowel movements. If you're pooping rocks, we need more fiber and more fermented foods. If you're pooping dry logs, we need more fiber and fermented foods. If you're pooping easily passed logs and snakes that you can control, then that's a correct amount of fiber for you. Now we're stressing, are you getting greens, cabbage family, onion family, mushrooms, and colors?
That's a great breakdown. And I think something that people can really use as a practical note to build up. How important is it to pay attention to anti-nutrients when it comes to personalization of your diet?
Oh, sure. So there's a lot of conversation about lectins, about oxalates, about histamines. So this will depend on your issues. In general, people who have problems with histamines are likely having an issue with overgrowth of harmful yeast. So we need to help address that. And they may need to be on a low histamine diet for a period while we're addressing that. And likewise, people with oxalate issues, again, that's often tied into a overgrowth of yeast. And so we'll have to address that. It's also much more prevalent in people with autism spectrum disorder. Now, the anti-nutrients and the issue of lectins, and the plant paradox, I wrote a book about that. Lectins are a protein with a sugar side chain. They are diffuse in the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the fungi kingdom. Even if you stopped eating all plants and fungi and were eating only meat, you're still going to have some lectins. So it's not that you can get entirely away from lectins. For some, nightshades are a bigger problem. And the lectins in grains and legumes are a bigger problem. And so, yes, for some, a more restrictive elimination diet may be very helpful initially. And then we try to expand the diet to the least restricted diet. But, the concept that we can go completely lectin-free, the way to do that is to drink water.
Right, which we can't live on for a long time. Very long. One more category on the anti-nutrients, there's ongoing, because kale has gotten so much attention. There are some folks that are out there, including some of my friends, and partially it's a joke and partially they're serious about it. They talk about things, not so much anti-nutrients, but toxicity that comes along with certain plant groups. And in the category of kale, I'm sure you've heard about people talking about, I think it's thiamine is going to be one. And how much do you pay attention to that? How much do you not pay attention to that? And I'm not just talking about kale, but when it comes to any classification of plant foods and potential toxicity that's included along with it.
So it absolutely true. Plants are a mixture of compounds that are really great for us and really harmful for us. One of the key principles I have is diversity of plant species. That I want you to have 200 different plant species in a year. And that, greens, for example, if I ate kale, I'm very fond of kale. I love kale. It's really wonderful. But if I had kale every day, eventually the toxic compounds in kale would probably make me sick. But if I have kale today, lettuce tomorrow, bok choy the next day, a big parsley onion salad the next day, and I keep rotating my greens, now the compounds that are toxic in those plants are not a problem. I can excrete them. Any plant compound that I eat day in and day out, I will have some risk for having a toxic reaction. As long as I am rotating my plants, it is much, much less of a problem.
So here we are, summer is towards the latter part of summer. And, that means different things are in season. You get to enjoy different aspects. Talk to us about just for you specifically, everybody wants to know, what is the doctor eating? And you've been very vocal that changes over a period of time. For example, you've shared online how, you really in the beginning craved greens, like all the time you craved greens. And then at one point in time, there was a switch that was flipped and you weren't craving them as much. And you thought that the message for that was your body was telling you, you maybe filled up those reserves for those nutrients in particular that you were missing before. So what does your diet look like right now in the context of those 9 cups of fruits and vegetables that you're trying to get in a day? Take us through a day right now in the context of summer 2021.
People may know that I'm doing more intermittent fasting. So on yesterday, for example, I would have about 300 calories of a PC pudding, which is some aronia berries, phosphatidylcholine, omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, inulin, cocoa, cinnamon, and a host of other spices, and some chia seed. So pudding, about 300 calories. And that would be all the calories for that day. Then today, I'm having homemade chicken soup. So I've made some broth with the chicken carcass, a bunch of chicken feet. So we have a couple quarts of homemade broth. We'll use that. We'll use a couple onions, a big mound of chopped parsley and carrots, some fresh garden herbs, rosemary and sage that will go in to the soup, bring it all to a simmer. And then I'll have my big bowl that'll have my soup in. I'll probably put in 2 to 3 cups of chopped parsley in my bowl of soup, and I'll start ladling in my soup. And if Jackie remembers to bring home some celery, I'll chop some raw celery. We'll dump that in as well. There'll also be some zucchini, mushrooms, and red peppers in the soup as well. And I'll have several bowls of soup. I'll probably have a green smoothie. Again, probably with the parsley or lavage as well. And perhaps some green grapes, olive oil in the smoothie. And I'll have as many bowls of soup and parsley as probably 2 or 3. And so by eating every other day, excuse me, I'm giving myself hormetic stress, which helps with autophagy, helps keep my cells young. And if I do a 2 or 3 or 4 day fast, or a fast where I have only like 300 calories a day, so intermittent calorie restriction, then when I do my refeed, then my stem cells come out of my bone marrow into my bloodstream, and that refreshes and youthens my skin, my brain, my heart, my lungs, my blood vessels. And that's my plan, Dhru, for living and thriving to 120.
It's a beautiful plan and a good inspiration. You're at this place now where intermittent fasting and fasting is a regular part of your world. How important or not important is that for somebody who's starting from the beginning? How do you, when you're meeting with the vets at the VA and you're sharing with them, or you're talking to somebody who just literally picked up your book and is getting started, because fasting is so trendy in a good way right now. There's so much research that continues to come out. How important is that to include or potentially not include in the beginning?
So in general, my preference is we work on the diet, get them well into Wahls level 1 or level 2, and not worry about fasting. Now, interestingly enough, occasionally I'll have someone who doesn't want to make any change to their eating pattern for a variety of family reasons, but they could easily skip breakfast. And so they'll have lunch and an early supper. So they do time restricted feeding. And so they start with that. And then they come back to me like, okay, I've been working on my diet. We've gotten rid of the sugar. It's more Mediterranean now. And now I'm ready to do Wahls level 1. So in general, I prefer you clean up your diet first and then think about time restricted feeding and fasting. But again, if someone comes to me and says, my family's not going to make any changes, but I'm good with skipping breakfast and doing time restricted feeding, and sort of gradually just changing my family's meal plan without their knowing it. The key is you need to listen deeply to your patient and come up with a plan that they're excited about, that they could do 100%.
Because if you can find something that you can do 100%, you can always then focus on the second domino. It's when people try to do too much, which now goes into behavioral design. They try to do too much, they fall down because it's a lot for anybody. It's like telling somebody, they haven't been saving for retirement, and all of a sudden saying, in 1 year, you have to save all the money you need for the rest of your retirement. That's going to be a very arduous, if not impossible task that's there. You're going to get discouraged, and then you're going to end up quitting and going back to your lifestyle that you had before. So this is all about making those moves in the right direction, hitting that first domino, which allows us to focus in, get a quick win, and then we can get the next domino after that.
We have to have a intervention they can do and that they're excited about.
When it comes to getting excited about, one of your, we talked about diet, we talked about fasting. And as we said in the beginning of the interview, the Wahls protocol is so much more than those things, although those things are a huge, huge baseline foundation and often where people first get started. When it comes to getting people excited about things, let's talk about the category of movement. How have you found, with all the research that's out there on how, just for a term that people can, normally use, exercise, but really we're talking about movement and its benefits that are there. How have you found that you help people get excited about integrating that into their larger protocol?
If we can come up with a strategy that fits into their day, whether it is adding more walking while they're at work or during work, walking with their family, do they fit it into before work, after work? So it's a conversation about, what does your day look like? How can we fit it in? And what are the activities that are fun for you? And so it's different for everyone. Driving to a gym takes a lot of time, and can be hard for people to do. Although driving to a gym to meet friends and family, it's a social event, can be immensely rewarding and fun. Walking with your spouse on a daily basis, or with your kids on a daily basis, gives you, or with friends, gives you that social contact. So again, it's a conversation with the person. What is fun and what can fit into your day? It must be fun. It must be something they enjoy.
Yeah, you have to have some sense of feeling like a draw towards it. Even if it's challenging, it has to be fun. It has to be that fun element that's there. I was listening to a practitioner who's pretty well known. I don't know if you're connected with her or not, but Rhonda Patrick, and writes and shares a lot of things in this space. Actually, yes, I think I saw an interview with you guys from years ago when you were first just starting off. It might have even been before your book was published, or it was right when your book was published. But Rhonda was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast this week, and I was watching their interview together because I always enjoy, her sharing her knowledge because she's so deeply read. She was sharing the story that, my mom, this is Rhonda talking, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, said my mom is in pretty poor health And it's just so hard, even though I live and breathe this, it's so hard to really incorporate any aspect of movement. So a few years ago, what I decided, again, Rhonda talking about her mom, is that I got her a sauna. And, sometimes, people don't have the means to do that. You can go to a friend's sauna. And I thought, at least if I could get some good stress, right? The positive stress, same type of stress that comes from, working out in her life on a regular basis, that's at least something. So what are your thoughts about that? That, there's some people that are just in a place where they just not going to move at all, right? Could there be other options? And could sauna be one of those things that they can incorporate? And is there anything else like that?
So whenever you're in a sauna or in a hot tub, your blood vessels dilate by the surface of your skin, which increases the blood flow through your heart. That is a very nice, gentle cardiovascular exercise if you tolerate heat. Now, people with MS often do not tolerate heat at all. And so for them, they probably would not tolerate a sauna. And actually, for years, I did very, very poorly with heat, and very poorly if I got any kind of febrile illness. As I recovered, I tolerated heat. I enjoyed saunas. I got myself a sauna. And in fact, I take a sauna probably 5 to 6 days a week, and I can take it quite comfortably up to 125, 140 degrees. Amazes my neurologist. But, it's a great hormetic heat stress, and it's gentle aerobic exercise.
That's great. Is there anything else like that? We're just talking about the tools that are in the toolbox. Are there other things that you have done yourself or recommended to other people that fall in that same category?
Cold hormetic stress. So adding a cold shower, taking a cool bath, taking a ice bath. And this is all, Wim Hof will certainly talk with you about that as well. Again, because we live in controlled environments, air conditioning, central heat, we live in a very, very narrow temperature environment, which has decreased our metabolic resilience. So giving ourselves more exposures to expand the temperature, both on the upper and lower end, will improve our metabolic resilience. I recommend it very much.
I love that. Both great options. Piggybacking off of this topic of metabolic resilience, let's dive deeper into some of your own understandings and emphasis when it comes to, you've always talked about metabolic health with autoimmune, patients or even people that are on their way. But even more so recently, we were chit-chatting before, and you were talking about, the importance of blood sugar and balanced blood sugar as one of those things to pay attention to, in addition to, what not to eat, what are the superfoods to eat, how does blood sugar, which then connects to metabolic health and insulin sensitivity, how does that make autoimmune better or worse?
People with a serious autoimmune condition are much more likely to have insulin resistance, central obesity, prediabetes, and diabetes, and also heart disease. If we have insulin resistance, again, that increases and accelerates the damage from your autoimmune disease. And we see this very much in all of our clinical trials, that people with MS often don't realize that they've developed insulin resistance. They may not realize that they're pre-diabetic. And we've had several folks not realize that they had already become diabetic. This is an epidemic across our country. So certainly one of the things I recommend is that you ask your personal physician to get a fasting insulin and a fasting glucose, and sort out, do you have insulin resistance? If you have insulin resistance, then actually it would be, the next thing to do is to get a continuous glucose monitor or a glucose finger stick monitor, and monitor your blood sugar and get better glycemic control, lower your insulin level. And this is where a lower carb diet, a lower time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting can be really very helpful.
And, just to connect it back to your story and you sharing very openly, in this interview and past interviews, you were talking about your battle well before you were diagnosed with progressive MS and, in the wheelchair and dealing with all this pain. You had endometriosis. That was one of the things early on. And we know now more and more data is coming out there is that endometriosis is so connected to, metabolic health and insulin sensitivity.
Polycystic ovarian disease,
Yep.
insulin resistance. Yes. And so, no doubt, had I not discovered all of this, I would have, the Wahls protocol and changed my diet. Because previously, as a vegetarian, I had a very high carb diet. That certainly would have accelerated the insulin resistance and put me at great risk for prediabetes and diabetes, even though I was quite trim. That is epidemic. Even if you are trim, you have a high carb diet, you may be unaware that you are developing insulin resistance and at significant risk for prediabetes, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and heart disease. And all of that will accelerate and worsen your autoimmune disease if you have that.
Yeah, I come from an Indian background, and South Asians, especially here in America, but now it's globally as the American diet is being exported all over the world. They suffer for some of the worst metabolic rates, even the ones who are vegetarian. Much of my family still is vegetarian, and many folks are being diagnosed increasingly as the generations kind of continue with autoimmune conditions. And it's a funny thing, but I think that your message of even the 9 cups of fruits and vegetables, it's just as important for vegetarians because, as you were a vegetarian. It's so often that even vegetarians themselves don't get a lot of raw vegetables. They're more of a carbitarian.
That is true. Absolutely.
I want to return back to something that we brought up in the beginning, which you were sharing about. And I've seen some videos on Instagram and Facebook about you talking about this. And that is the mindset piece. How is it and why is it so important that figuring out your why is often the first step when you go down this pathway of healing?
Again, this is something my vets taught me. One of the things that we did, we would have the intake class, people would come back every month, and then we had skills classes, and you could come back forever to the skills class. And we had classes about cooking, lots of fun. We had all sorts of movement classes, yoga, tai chi, strength building. And we had our health behavior folks come. And they talked to us about, purpose. They talked to us about the hero's journey. They talked about why, what you want your health for. And what I saw from the vets was these mental, emotional, spiritual classes were their favorite classes. And they were the most impactful. And so I began incorporating those lessons into my intake and our monthly classes as well. And that's because it takes work to create a new habit. No matter how much I want to do that, it's going to take work. It's going to take work to extinguish the harmful habits. And to be willing to do the work, to grind it in over the month that'll take to get this habit established, it is so much easier if I've had clarity as to why I want to go on this journey. A question I love asking is, the house's smoke is rolling out the windows. There's a little, you can see a few flames. Is there something or someone you care so deeply about that you would run into that house without thinking to save that person or that something? And tell me what that is. And nearly always, people know immediately who that is, or occasionally what that something is. If they don't have an answer to that question, actually, then I would send them off to our mental health department because they're probably suffering from depression and loneliness in a big way. We have to get them connected. If they have someone that they care so deeply about, then the next questions we have is, now, if your health could moderately improve, how would your relationship with that person change? What would you do? And so that's a conversation. Then the next conversation is, okay, if your health could moderately improve, what physical celebration would you do with that person? Now we have an attraction, we have a purpose, we have meaning. And we put that at the center of what we check in every month. That they want to be there for your son's or daughter's graduation or wedding, or they want to do this big hike with their son or their daughter or their spouse. And what do we do to help them achieve that goal? And then we have the conversation, okay, so what's the next small step?
It's so simple, and yet it's so profound, because not wanting something or trying to avoid something, sure, that can get you started, but it's often not the thing that can keep you going. There has to be something that you're being pulled towards, in addition to not wanting something, like not wanting disease. I don't want to be sick. You hear that so often. Great. That can be a central part of it, but there has to be a greater why that pulls you along. For comparison, can you share those for you when you were at a place where you were looking for hope in your life and your journey? What were those things that were pulling you forward? What were the things and the celebrations that you would do with those that you loved if your health moderately improved?
Before entering medical school as an athlete, I did wilderness travel, full contact free sparring, ran marathons, bike marathons, ski marathons. When I had my kids, I assumed that I'd teach my kids resilience and all the skills they would need to be successful in wilderness and sports. By the time, my son was 10, my daughter was 7, it was very clear that I wouldn't be teaching them sports. I wouldn't be doing wilderness travel. And I was having to continually reimagine what parenting would be like. And what I was thinking about, Dhru, was, okay, my kids are watching, and I can either model that when life gets difficult, you complain and give up, or I could model that I keep doing everything that I possibly can. And so I was doing my little physical therapy every day. I'd swim in the pool every day, and then when I couldn't swim anymore, I'm doing a little water aerobics. And my mantra was, your kids are watching. And then the other thing that I was thinking deeply about was, my kids are still very young. I want to see them graduate from high school. And so my goal at that point was, I'm just going to still be alive. I had completely accepted that, with progressive MS, secondary progressive MS, functions once lost do not come back. And it was very clear, nothing was coming back. I'd had my illness 7 years, or 27 years if I counted the trigeminal neuralgia. Nothing ever got better, despite incredibly aggressive treatment that I had, including Tysabri. And interestingly enough, when in 2008, I had redesigned my paleo diet, I added meditation, I added e-stim, I was still doing my physical therapy, and my physical therapist was like, well, you are getting stronger, and he had me lifting weights, and walking with a cane. I didn't know what any of it meant, Drew, because I had accepted that, recovery was not possible. And, I remember in April, walking around the block with my wife, Jackie, saying, you think I could try riding my bike again? I said, well, you are doing really good. Maybe in the fall, if things keep going well, we could get the bike out for you. Well, a couple weeks later, it was Mother's Day, and I decided I wanted to ride my bike. So I'm out in the garage, fussing with the seat because my son had been riding. He's 6'5", so I was, pulling the seat down. My family hears me. They run out. We have this emergency family meeting. Unfortunately, Jack lets me, take the bike out. We all get into position because she decides that we can try. And I get on the bike. She gives the all clear, and I bike around the block. My kids are crying. Jackie's crying, and I'm crying. Of course, whenever I tell this story, I get pretty emotional because that was when I understood, like, oh my God, who knows how much recovery might be possible? That the current understanding of secondary progressive MS is incomplete. And that by doing what I was doing, things were happening in my brain and my spinal cord that no one expected. Mm. I hadn't planned on any celebrations because I didn't know that it was possible I could get better. But now I tell my patients, plan on celebrations, plan on the possibility that things could improve, that by addressing your environment as thoroughly as you can, by addressing diet, by addressing sleep, stress, movement, and we'll do this step by step by achievable small step, that your body will begin doing the chemistry of life correctly. And the whole network of biochemical reactions, as they begin to be in better and better alignment, and molecules are made correctly in your cells and in your tissues, perhaps for the first time in years, you'll look at the mirror and you realize you're getting younger. And your family and friends will say, oh my God, you look 10 years younger. And your doctors and your physicians and your physical therapists will say, like, you're getting stronger. We could advance your exercises. And you'll be able to have celebrations that a year ago you would have thought were not at all possible. And we see that. We see that time and time again.
A powerful reminder about just how crucial mindset is to the whole aspect. And even when you're doing everything right, as I'm sure you've seen with some of your patients that have followed the protocol, but you are missing out on the mindset piece. You are just a few life events away from being derailed and setting back. So that mindset piece is insurance on everything else that we're paying attention to. And I'm so glad that it's getting the attention that it deserves by people like you talking about it. I want to return back to, as we start to wind down and talk about the ecosystem that you've created in your world to provide people with solutions and all sorts of different ways to help them and coach them down this process. I think it's worthwhile touching on it because you are known as the individual who not only made this incredible before and after recovery, but also went from being banned from the MS Society to then getting $1 million grant to pursue the research that you're doing. And it's really the research that has been a huge part of what's got the Wahls protocol and your work the attention that it deserves. So it's nice to use this as an opportunity to just contrast some of that recent research that just came out, especially comparing and contrasting it to, again, some of the well-intentioned older approaches that were more low-fat and very based on sort of like the old nutritional ideology. So talk about the latest study and what you saw there and how the Wahls protocol was compared to another common protocol that's used for autoimmune patients.
Yeah, so we compared the SWANK diet, which is a low-fat, looks a very low-fat, heart-healthy diet, and the Wahls diet. Now, what we did first to manage the conflict of interest, I want to be sure that people know I did not consent the patients. I had no contact with patients. It had no contact with the data. The statistician who analyzed the data was blinded or masked to diet assignment. And we had people came in, we got baseline measures of fatigue severity scale, modified fatigue impact scale, the MS quality of life, physical health, and mental health scales. And we checked walking endurance by having them walk for 6 minutes. We asked them, and we did weighed food records. And then we said, eat your usual diet, come back in 12 weeks, we'll repeat all the measures, which we did. So we saw that things were stable. The fatigue was stable, the quality of life was stable, walking endurance was stable. We randomized them, and they were either on the SWANK diet or the Wahls diet. And they came back in 12 weeks, we repeated all of the measures, and then they came back in another 12 weeks, so 24 weeks of intervention, and we repeated all of the measures. Now, the main outcome, primary outcome, was would fatigue severity scale score drop, so get better, that is, less fatigue, more for the SWANK group or for the Wahls group? And of course, we hypothesized to be more for the Wahls group. Our secondary analyses looked at modified fatigue impact scale, quality of life, and 6-minute walk test at 12 weeks and everything at 24 weeks. To our surprise, both SWANK and Wahls dropped at 12 weeks, and statistically not different between the two. At 12 weeks, the Wahls group had clinically significant and statistically significant greater improvements in the physical health quality of life, mental health quality of life. Neither group had much change for walking endurance. At 24 weeks, fatigue, as measured by fatigue severity, was improved both for Wahls and SWANK. Again, statistically not different. The modified fatigue impact scale, which is a more sensitive measure of MS-related fatigue, was markedly better. That is, less fatigue for the Wahls group, and that was clinically and statistically different than SWANK. And again, the quality of life was markedly improved, again, for Wahls, for both physical health, mental health, and was statistically different than, and clinically different than SWANK. And then, interestingly enough, the SWANK group, their walking endurance improved statistically significant, but not clinically significant at 24 weeks. The Wahls group improved statistically and was now clinically significant in terms of their walking endurance. The p-value there was 0.08, so not quite statistically significant, but clinically significant. You know, I think the take-home message is both the Wahls and the SWANK diet did reduce fatigue. Wahls had greater fatigue reductions and greater improvements in quality of life and in walking endurance. If people prefer to do a low saturated fat diet, they can certainly, embrace the SWANK and feel like, okay, that is helpful. I have looked at the dietary data for both the SWANK and the Wahls group, and I mean, I have to put out there that the Wahls diet is not a high fat diet. It's not. You don't have to feel like you're having this enormously high saturated fat diet when you implement the Wahls diet.
Yeah, and it does seem to be that there's some evidence that if you're on a low fat diet for too long, especially, obviously, as you mentioned, both groups saw some benefits when it came to fatigue. And that just goes to anytime you take out processed foods in general, you're going to get a little bit better. So that's great. But it tends to be that it's just tougher when you're on a lower fat diet in the case of a swank diet for enjoyment and actually making something sustainable. And if the key is longevity, because it's not that, we talked about this in the first interview, it's not that you do this protocol, this lifestyle, and then you're good, and then you return back to who you were before. It's you continue to maintain it. You maintain it because you're creating the environment. It's the soil that you're trying to change so that the body's natural seed grows from that beneficial soil. As soon as you change the soil again, you are going to run into the same problems, including an autoimmune flare-up or whatever else it might be that you had before.
And metabolic problems, insulin resistance.
Yes.
The high carb diets put you at greater risk for insulin resistance.
It's so true. And that can lead to a whole host of other challenges that are there, including, being more vulnerable for things like, opportunistic viruses like COVID-19. We know autoimmune patients have a vulnerability that's there, especially many of them having not the best metabolic health, and that being one of the pathways that you can be exposed, that your immune system can be more exposed to viruses that you're surrounded to. So just all in all, another reason to continue to pay attention to the work that you're doing. And for somebody to say, what's the downside? If I go down this pathway, you're going to end up healthier. You're going to end up most likely losing a little bit of weight. You're going to end up nutritionally more sound. Your metabolic markers are going to improve. So, yes, I hope, and as you've documented through many case studies and your clinical work, that people do see improvements in their, core disease state, some as dramatically as yours. The real question is, at the end of the day, what do you have to lose? And more importantly, what do you have to gain when it comes to that mindset of that thing is pulling you forward? If you know your why and you know why that thing is so important to you, whatever that is, being there for your family, showing up in your business, being a part of your church community, giving back to people, leaving a legacy that's there, whatever it is, now you have the motivation to keep you going and actually say, you know what, this is worth giving a shot.
It is key. And it's worth. The other thing that I work with people on, Dhru, pick when do you want to start, and view this as an experiment. That I'm going to be the principal investigator of the most important experiment known as my life. I have to decide when it is that I'm going to start, and how long the intervention will be, and what precisely am I going to do, and be sure then that you do that.
Absolutely. That's a great insight. Well, Terry, this has been fantastic. I want to cover the world and the ecosystem you've created because, the book is out there and it's been out there for some time now. The Wahls Protocol, the expanded edition. You can find the link in the show notes. There was also an incredibly beautiful documentary that was created about your life and your message. Tell us about that. And then let's talk a little bit about some of the coaching platforms and challenges that you've created that make it a lot more easy, because when you do things with other people, it's a lot more easy to implement. But I'd love to start off with the documentary. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So Carolyn Moyes, who's an Australian, contacted me and did this beautiful, beautiful documentary where she interviewed me, and then hired a lovely actress, a couple of them, to act out these various key scenes from my life that you hear about. And so I've seen this. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. It is emotionally intense because I take you through some incredibly painful, powerful points in my life. And so you get a very intimate look into my heart, into my experience. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. You'll be inspired. Absolutely.
Amazing. And we have a link to that. And you can check out the trailer and, check out the film and the documentary online. And let's talk about the ecosystem. I've looked at the stats, Terry, and I've been involved, co-written too, but been involved in the launch of a bunch of New York Times bestsellers. And, the stats are grim. People who buy books, which is already a small part of the population, only about 10% of people make it past the first chapter, right? It's the human nature. It's going to be part of it. And so there has to be other solutions that are out there for people who believe in a message, and maybe they're not, big readers, or they find that they get distracted, or they have a lot of duties in their life. So you have an ecosystem of things to make it easier for people to go and follow that step-by-step process and have their hand held. Can you chat a little bit about some of those things you've created?
Well, so one thing we have at premium menus, very easy. So you get menus, recipes, and shopping lists. People like that a lot. We have another course on the electrical stimulation of muscles to learn more about that. That's very helpful. But the most helpful is the Autoimmune Intervention Mastery course, which is online, 5 modules, many lessons within each module. We cover mindset, we cover the food pillar, movement pillar, the supplements, and all the other supplemental things you can do, and then how to go forth and live with your family. Plus, you get 7 weeks of a group call with me and the other cohort of people that are going through the Autoimmune Intervention Mastery course at that time. And you get access to the Facebook group. It has been phenomenal. We've put thousands of people through that. It's really a marvelous, marvelous program. And then several times a year, we do the 5-day challenge, and that is free. So be sure you sign up for my newsletter so you'll get the next announcement when we do that again. And again, we put tens of thousands of people through the 5-day challenge to help them get started with understanding why they're doing this and what their next step is. And then the last thing I want to mention is the Radical Health Upgrade Program for those people who are deeply motivated and who want to have a very small, intimate group. So a couple times a year, again, we have a small cohort of folks who go through the Radical Health Upgrade. They get a weekly one-on-one contact with my health coach and a weekly small group contact with me and everyone in the team as a group support over 12 weeks. That has been phenomenal, and that will be starting again. And again, we accept people into the Radical Health Upgrade just a couple times a year.
Incredible. We'll have the links to all those in the show notes. Dr. Terry Wahls, it's been a pleasure. Can you leave us with a final thought or idea that can put a bow tie on this interview and be a lasting message for folks?
Wherever you are, in whatever your health state is in, there is so much that you can do to turn things around. If I can come back from having difficulty sitting up, beginning to have difficulty with brain fog, and profound levels of pain due to trigeminal neuralgia, to a rich and full life, then so can you. There is so much that is under your control.
Hey, YouTube, if you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Terry Wahls, you're going to love this mashup with Dr. Jason Fung and Dr. William Li. Check it out right over here.
There's more than 100 foods that can actually starve cancers.
Here's a guy who's sort of like one of the most prominent cancer researchers, and he's like, sugar scares me.